And what was his last statement to her supposed to mean? You'll get what's coming to you? That almost sounded like a threat to her. Max was many things, but threatening wasn't one of them. In fact, he was the softest-spoken, kindest person she had ever known. She had never heard him raise his voice, and never once heard him speak in such a way. But the kicker was his statement that his assistant would meet her here at the Four Seasons. How did he know that's where she would be? Did he hire a private investigator? What's wrong, babe? Jake asked from behind her. She showed him the texts she got from her husband. He read them and shrugged his shoulders. So he finally decided to go along with the program. What's the big deal? He asked. This just doesn't sound like Max at all, she said. And I've never known him to work with an assistant. I have the feeling he knows a lot more than he's letting on. So what? Jake said. He's still in the hospital, isn't he? Hell, he probably can't even take a piss without someone helping him. And so what if he knows? What's going on? He'll be dead the second he finishes with the books anyway. I'll call Mario and give him the good news. Okay, Shannon said quietly. Jake looked at her, concerned. You're not having second thoughts about all this, are you? He asked. No, it's just, she began. Just what? Jake asked. He'll be dead soon enough. Then it doesn't matter what he decides to give you, it'll all be yours anyway. Then we can be together forever, just like we planned, right? Right, she said with a wan smile. Max finished his second cup of tea for the day and looked at Eli, now sitting in a chair next to his bed, reading a magazine. Anything interesting? Max asked. Eli closed the magazine and tossed it on the tray that went over Max's bed. He shook his head. Do you really care that much about who some actress is sleeping with? The tall man asked. Max snickered as he looked at the cover of the magazine. Personally, I don't, he said, but I guess there's a lot of people out there who do. A waste of damn time if you ask me, Eli said. Max nodded his head in agreement. No argument from me, he said. He looked up and saw Eli glaring at him hard. What? He asked. Do I have something in my teeth? No, Eli said. I'm just trying to figure out what a dresser sees in you. I've never known her to get all googly-eyed over a mortal man before. I'm trying to figure that out myself, Max said. I'm just a regular guy like anyone else. No, you're not, Eli said. Trust me on that. I can read a man's face like a book. What I want to know is, what are your true feelings toward her? I can't explain it, but I love her, Max said. Does that make sense? I'm a married man, but I love another woman. Eli chuckled at that. Makes perfect sense to me, he said. You're a fairly young, normal, red-blooded man. She's a very beautiful woman, just a few thousand years older than you. But you have to admit, she looks good. Yeah, she's very beautiful, but it's more than that, Max said. He examined him carefully but saw no indication of ill intent. Much more. It's like she's a part of me now, Eli nodded his head. She is, Eli said. But trust me, she's not like any woman you've ever met. I know, Max said. I guess I need to be on my best behavior. Eli chuckled as he nodded his head. Reckon so, he said. But something tells me that won't be a problem. What makes you say that? Max asked. Well, you're a good, decent, honest, hard-working man, Eli said. You followed the rules all your life, always sought to do the right thing, never cut corners or took the easy way out. You've always faced your challenges head-on, even when it meant being the bearer of bad news. All that will serve you well. You know all that about me? Max asked. Yep, Eli said. I can tell a lot about a fella by looking in his eyes. The dresser loves you. She loves everyone she helps, but it's different with you. Truth is, she needs you, probably more than you need her. Just treat her with respect and dignity, don't try to hide anything from her because you can't. Be open and honest with her, even if you think the truth might hurt. And don't ever do anything to hurt her. I could never do that to her, Max said. I know you'd never deliberately hurt her, but you're human after all, Eli said. Like every human, you're prone to make mistakes. All I'm saying is that when you do, own up to them. That makes sense, Max said. But I'm a bit confused. You said she needs me more than I need her. What did you mean by that? That's a fair question, Eli said. And it deserves a fair answer. She's immortal, but she's not without emotion. Truth is, most mortals would go crazy in a matter of minutes if they had to deal with what she faces every day, all day, year in and year out. She's been dealing with it for many years. I'm amazed she's been able to stay sane all this time, surrounded by the evil she faces on a regular basis. Can you imagine what could happen if she went insane, even for a moment? Max shook his head. I can't even begin to imagine that. So where do I come into all this? Max asked. She needs someone who can help her out on this plane of existence, Eli said. More than that, she needs someone to help keep her grounded, someone she can rely on, someone she can lean on from time to time, and more importantly, someone who can understand her and give her the love she deserves. That almost sounds like the definition of a husband, Max said. Reckon so, Eli said. You think you can handle that? Think carefully before you answer. Remember, she's not like any creature you've ever met before. She may look like a young girl, but she's not by a long shot, Eli said. I know, Max said. I guess I need to be on my best behavior. Eli chuckled as he nodded his head. Reckon so, he said. But something tells me that won't be a problem. What makes you say that? Max asked. Well, you're a good, decent, honest, hard-working man, Eli said. You followed the rules all your life, always sought to do the right thing, never cut corners or took the easy way out. You've always faced your challenges head-on, even when it meant being the bearer of bad news. All that will serve you well. You know all that about me? Max asked. Yep, Eli said. I can tell a lot about a fella by looking in his eyes. The dresser loves you. She loves everyone she helps, but it's different with you. Truth is, she needs you, probably more than you need her. Just treat her with respect and dignity, don't try to hide anything from her because you can't. Be open and honest with her, even if you think the truth might hurt. And don't ever do anything to hurt her. I could never do that to her, Max said. I know you'd never deliberately hurt her, but you're human after all, Eli said. Like every human, you're prone to make mistakes. All I'm saying is that when you do, own up to them. That makes sense, Max said. But I'm a bit confused. You said she needs me more than I need her. What did you mean by that? That's a fair question, Eli said. And it deserves a fair answer. She's immortal, but she's not without emotion. Truth is, most mortals would go crazy in a matter of minutes if they had to deal with what she faces every day, all day, year in and year out. She's been dealing with it for many years. I'm amazed she's been able to stay sane all this time, surrounded by the evil she faces on a regular basis. Can you imagine what could happen if she went insane, even for a moment? Max shook his head. I can't even begin to imagine that. So where do I come into all this? Max asked. She needs someone who can help her out on this plane of existence, Eli said. More than that, she needs someone to help keep her grounded, someone she can rely on, someone she can lean on from time to time, and more importantly, someone who can understand her and give her the love she deserves. That almost sounds like the definition of a husband, Max said. Reckon so, Eli said. You think you can handle that? Think carefully before you answer. Remember, she's not like any creature you've ever met before. She may look like a young girl, but she's not by a long shot, Max said. Think about this, Eli said. If you decide to be her soulmate, you'll know love like you've never known before. She may not be there to make your dinner or wash your clothes every day, but she'll always be with you in every way that truly matters. In a way, the fate of humanity could be in your hands. No pressure there, Max said sarcastically. Eli laughed. You sound like my grandson, he said. He slapped Max on the shoulder and stood up. There's no great rush. Take your time, consider it carefully. I will, Max said. So, where are you off to? There's a couple of fellas down the street I need to have a chat with, he said with a wink. Don't worry, I'll be back with that. He left the room. Shannon Burns and Jake Sylvester were sitting at their table in the restaurant of the Four Seasons, finishing their meal. She looked at her watch and saw it was 5:59 p.m. The instant her watch read 6 o'clock, she heard someone at her shoulder. Mrs. Burns, I presume, a female voice said. Shannon turned to see a young blonde woman standing at her side. She looked to be fresh out of college. If that, my God, Shannon thought, is Max robbing the cradle or what? No, the woman said with a sly smile on her face as she took a seat between Shannon and Jake. Not what? Shannon asked. Robbing the cradle, the young woman said. That's what you were thinking, wasn't it? How did she know that? Shannon asked herself. It doesn't matter how, the woman said, her smile widening. Jake looked between the two women, confused. His eyes took in the woman's pretty face, her smooth skin and soft, doll-like eyes. I'd love to get that between the sheets, he thought to himself. The young woman gave Jake an icy glare. No, you wouldn't, she said. Now it was Shannon's turn to be confused. Wouldn't what? She asked. The woman, your boyfriend here thinks he'd like to get me in his bed, she said. Jake looked embarrassed as Shannon shot him an angry look. Let's get this done, the woman said. Shannon reached for her bag and pulled out an external hard drive. She handed it to the woman. Everything Max needs is here, Shannon said. The drive has been encrypted, and the passcode is written on the bottom of the drive. We want to get regular updates on his progress. You'll hear from him when it's time, the woman said. Speaking of your husband, aren't you at all concerned about his condition? No, not particularly, Shannon said. He has a job to do, and if he's smart, he'll do it without asking a lot of questions. And just so you know, if he tries to email any of that information to anyone, like the authorities, the entire drive will be erased, and Max will end up in worse shape than he is now. Do you understand? Shannon put one hand on the young woman's wrist and squeezed for emphasis. I understand, the woman said. And if you don't take your hand off me, you won't live long enough to regret touching me. Do you understand me? A spark flew between Shannon's hand and the woman's wrist, and Shannon pulled her hand away quickly. I'll be leaving now. We'll be in touch. And do me a favor, the next time you go out in public, keep your dog on a leash. She got up from the table, then reached in her pocket. One last thing, she said. Your husband said he has no further need of this. She tossed Max's wedding ring on the table. Good night. With that, she turned and left, leaving Shannon and Jake stunned. What the hell was that? Shannon asked. Jake shook his head and pulled out his phone. As she put Max's ring in her purse, she felt a momentary twinge of guilt, but that passed quickly as she thought of getting her hands on his money. I don't know, but I want her followed, he said, dialing a number on his phone. Yeah, she just left, he said to the person on the other end of the call. Petite, blonde, good-looking. Be careful. He ended the call and put his phone away. So, were you really thinking about taking her to bed? Shannon asked, anger on her face. I'm sorry, he said sheepishly. I couldn't help it. Well, you'd better get your act together, she said. A couple of minutes later, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and answered it. What do you mean she disappeared? He asked. Find her, whatever it takes. I want to know where she is. He ended the call and put his phone away. They lost her. Can you believe it? He told Shannon. She smiled and pulled out her phone. Don't worry, there's a tracker inside the drive enclosure, she said. We'll know exactly where it is. She fired up her app, but her face turned red with anger. After a couple of minutes, she shut her phone off and put it away. What's wrong? Jake asked. Somehow, she disabled the tracker, Shannon said. I can't get a lock on anything. Can I help you fellas with something? The tall, lanky man asked as he approached two large men in dark suits. He could easily see the pistols in their holsters under the jackets. Surprised by the appearance of the man, they instinctively reached for their firearms but were stopped by a voice behind them. Don't even think of it, the male voice said. They turned to see a younger man and a cowboy hat holding a long rifle in one gloved hand. They moved their hands away from their pistols and held them out palm forward. Now, why do you think these fellas are doing out here in this dark alley all dressed up like they're going to a hootenanny or something? The tall man asked. Who knows, Grandpa? The younger man asked. Why don't we ask Em? The tall, older man smiled and nodded his head. Good idea, son, he said. So, what are you fellas doing out here this time of night, dressed up like that and carrying those big old shooting irons? None of your goddamn business, old man, one of the men said. You hear the disrespect coming out of these fell mouths? Eli asked. Sure do, Amos said. Eli laughed and turned to the two men. You know, I have a mind to pat you two over my knee and give you the weapon your daddy should have given you years ago, he said. Just try it, old man, the other sloot growled. Eli smiled, and before either of the men could react, he had the bigger of the two men across his knee, his trousers around his ankles. The other man started to react but thought better of it when Amos put the muzzle of his rifle in his face. As they watched, Eli brought his hand down on the first man's bare buttocks. He screamed when Eli hit him, but the tall man wasn't done yet. He gave the man 10 swats on the rear end and left him on the ground crying. Eli looked at the other man. Well, are you going to take your licks? Eli asked. The man shook his head. No, please don't, he begged. Eli laughed and grabbed the man's pistol out of its holster. In seconds, he had the pistol disassembled and the parts strewn across the alleyway. He then grabbed the other man's pistol and did the same to it. You know, I think you boys need to take a little nap, Eli said. He grabbed the man at the junction of his neck and shoulders and squeezed. The man's eyes rolled into the back of his head, and he fell down unconscious. Eli bent down and did the same to the other man, who quietly closed his eyes and went to sleep. Damn, Grandpa, Amos said. Where'd you learn to do that? Saw it on one of the television shows of yours a few days ago, Eli said. Some guy with pointed ears did it, and I thought I'd give it a shot. Figured it couldn't hurt. You do know that was just a television program, Amos said. That wasn't real. Those were actors following a script. Now you tell me, Eli said. Sure looked real on the television. How long do you figure they'll be out? Amos said. Don't know, Eli said. Reckon about a day or so. Maybe I squeezed extra hard to make sure. Maybe I should hang around to make sure they don't get back up. No, Eli said. We'll be gone tomorrow. I don't think they'll be up before then. Even if they do wake up, they'll need to put their guns back together. Why don't you head on back to the hotel, spend the rest of the night with Danny, okay? We're heading back home tomorrow after her meeting with Max's stockbroker. Let us know when you're back, Amos said. I will, son, Eli said. Thanks. Amos turned and left the way he came. Eli took the time to smoke a cigarette before heading back to Max's room. That night, Max and Eli were watching television as a dress walked in the room. She went to Max and gave him a kiss, which he returned. Where's my kiss? Eli said jokingly. Lizzie would kick your bum if I kissed you, and you know it, she said with a smile. Max looked confused. Who's Lizzie, he wondered. Eli answered his question. Lizzie is my wife, Elizabeth, he said. And yeah, she would kick my bum. Oh, Max said. He turned to a dresser, So how did it go? Did you get the information? Yes, I got it all, she said. I've already disabled the tracker, worked through the encryption on the files, and got rid of the virus they put on the drive. You did all that? Max asked, shocked. Of course, she said with a satisfied smile. I told you I have doctorates in multiple disciplines, and I can multitask as well. So we're good to go with the plan then? Max asked. Yes, she said. I'll start going through this and make sure it just happens to get into the right hands. How did Shannon react when you gave her my ring? Max asked. She felt a tiny bit of guilt for a moment, but her greed took over, she said. She said she really doesn't care what happens to you. I'm sorry, Max nodded his head and felt his emotions rise again. A dresser sat on the bed and kissed his forehead. He instantly felt better and looked into her face. I just don't get it. Why would she do all this to me? He asked. All I've ever done is love her and support her. Adressa just shook her head. You did nothing wrong, Max, she said. Shannon is involved with some very bad people, and they've twisted her mind and played on her greed. She's not the same woman you married. You're not having second thoughts, are you? No, he said. Even if I thought I could get past the cheating, which I can't, the fact is I could never trust her again. You should also know that they intend to kill you no matter what, Adressa said. Shannon figures that's the only way she can get her hands on your money. You saw all this in her mind? Max asked. I did, she said. I had seen it before and hoped it was just a fleeting thought, but it wasn't. She's set on seeing you dead one way or another. What will we do? Max asked nervously. We follow our plan, she said firmly. Look at me. She took his head in her hands. Look me in the eye and listen to my words. Think of nothing else. He did as she directed. No hand raised against you will ever prevail, my love. You must finish what we started. You are my chosen, and I will see you through this. You understand? He felt his resolve stiffen and nodded his head. I understand, he said. Drink some tea and get some rest, she told him. You'll need it. I'll be by to see you off in the morning. Thank you, Max said, for everything. She stroked his face for a moment. Sweet dreams, she said with a smile before leaving. He poured another cup of tea and sipped it as he watched television with Eli for a bit. When he finished, he laid back in the bed. If you don't mind, I'm going to get some sleep, he told the older man. You can keep watching the TV if you want. It won't bother me. Reckon I just might do that, Eli said. As Max nodded off to sleep, Eli watched television. Max's mind was filled with dreams. When he woke up the next morning and saw Eli was still watching television, he asked, Didn't you get any sleep last night? Eli shook his head. Don't need to sleep anymore, he said. I take it you had a good night's sleep? Max smiled as he recalled his dreams, which seemed so vivid. Oh yeah, he said. Eli smiled as though he knew what was going through Max's mind. The nurses came and took Max for his morning x-rays and exams. A few minutes after he was back, the doctor showed up and gave him the good news. Well, Max, it looks like you're completely healed, he said. I see no reason to keep you here. I'll go ahead and start the process, and we'll have you ready to go in just a short bit. That's great, Doc, Max said. Thanks. By the time Max finished his breakfast, Adressa Kai came into the room. I hear you're getting discharged, she said. I am, Max said. No offense, but I'm ready to get out of here and back on my feet. No offense taken, she said. She turned to Eli. I understand you ran into a couple of Mario's goons last night? Yeah, Amos and I took care of them, he said. She nodded her head. Well, their boss isn't too happy with them right now, she said. That's their tough luck. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to Maximum. There's 2 tickets to Spokane, one for you and another for Eli. I got round-trip tickets for you both, but something tells me Eli won't need the return ticket. There's also some new ID cards in there for you, just in case. Danny and your attorney will be working with the stockbroker after they see Judge Stone this morning. Basically, everything is set to go. Wow, you have been busy, Max said. What about Mario's books? Did you have a chance to look at any of that information? Oh yes, she said. There's evidence of a multitude of crimes there: guns, drugs, prostitution, graft, pay-for-play, you name it. And it looks like a number of elected officials across the country are involved as well. No wonder they couldn't get anyone to look at them. I'm sorting through it all, but it'll take some time. So, how are you feeling? You look well rested, she said. I feel better than I have in a long time, Max said. And yes, I am well rested. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that, she said. And just so you know, she whispered in his ear, that was just a small taste of what's in store for you when this is all over. You mean, Max began before she silenced him with a kiss. Oh, yes, that was very real, she said after she broke the kiss. I hope you enjoyed it. Oh, my, Max said. He could still see her in that forest, giving herself to him completely. Hang on to that, she said, and don't worry. I'll write you every week, and I promise you'll see me every night. Write me? Max asked. What do you mean? Well, the rules at Camp Rollins are quite clear, she said. No phones, no internet, only what you would call snail mail. I'll make sure you have an address where you can reach me. And remember, your name is Bunnage, not Burns. Burnage, Max said. Got it. One more thing, Max, she said. I know you've been through Air Force boot camp. Trust me, this is a lot worse than that. Terrific, Max said. She smiled and shook her head. Don't worry about it, she said. You'll do just fine. You're a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for. There's an inner strength you've never tapped into before. That's not your fault, you've just never had to do that before. Trust me, you'll have to do this yourself, but I'll be right there with you. When you feel your strength starting to wane, think of me. Will you do that? I will, Max said. Good. Listen, they're getting ready to bring your discharge papers, so I'll have to get going, she said. And remember what I told you. I will, he said. She started to turn away, but Max stopped her. What about my luggage? Don't I need to take some things with me? No, a dresser just said. They'll have everything you need. Oh, okay, Max said. He looked into her face for a moment before he spoke again. I love you, a dresser, he said before kissing her. And I love you too, Max, she said. When they broke apart, she smiled at him one last time and left the room. After she left, he pulled out his clothing, which had been washed, and returned to the small wardrobe in the room. Making sure he had everything, he got dressed. By then, a nurse came into the room with his discharge papers and a wheelchair. She went over everything with him and had him sign the papers. What's the wheelchair for? He asked. That's for you, she said. Hospital policy. We don't want you getting hurt by accident on your way out. That makes sense, Max said, sitting down in the chair. The nurse wheeled him to the patient loading area, Eli following close behind. They got to the curb, and the nurse hailed a cab. She helped him get inside, even though he didn't really need any help, and Eli got in the other side. Where to? The driver asked after the door was closed. Airport, Max said. He looked at the tickets to find out what airline they would be flying on. American Airlines Terminal, please. You got it, the driver said, heading out. After they got to the terminal, Max realized they had a couple of hours before they needed to check in. Care for a beer before we have to go? It's on me, he offered. Why sure, Eli said. Let's go find us someplace to park. They found a small bar inside the terminal and ordered a beer. I appreciate that. So, what do you know about this camp? I know it's pretty tough, Eli said. You ever deal with anyone who's been through it? Max asked. Once or twice, Eli said. You don't think I'm up to this, do you? Max asked. Well, I think you got the heart for it, and I think you have the brains for it, Eli said. But I look like someone who spent 10 years sitting on his bum behind a keyboard all day, Max said. That's because, for the most part, I have. I've put on some weight, and I've gotten soft. I get that. I've been meaning to hit a gym, but I just haven't had time to do it. You think maybe that's why Shannon's doing what she's doing? Don't rightly know, son, Eli said. Could be. Maybe she sees you as someone she can push around because you've let her. Personally, I think it's mostly because she's greedy and she's let some a-hole fill her head with a bunch of crap. No argument there, Max said. We know she's after your money, Eli said. How much are we talking about? A lot, Max said. Somewhere north of $10 million. Eli whistled. How did you get all that? He asked. I've been fascinated with numbers and economics for years, Max said. My dad was a whiz on the stock market and he taught me everything he knew. I learned the value of saving and investing at an early age. He opened a custodial account with his broker for me when I was 14. I started small, made some mistakes along the way, but I learned from them. By the time I was 18, I was worth $500,000. I kept at it while I was in the Air Force, and by the time I went to college, I had over $5 million. It's doubled since then. No wonder she's so anxious to get her hands on it, Eli said. When Shannon and I got married, my broker suggested I get a prenuptial agreement, so my attorney put one together. Shannon was livid, but I got her to understand this was just to protect what I'd spent so long building up, Max said. My goal was to put whatever children we had through college, set them up, and be retired by the time I was 55. Guess she got tired of waiting, reckon so, Eli said. So, what advice do you have for me regarding this camp? Max asked. For starters, you've got an edge. Most of the guys who go to that camp don't, Eli said. Most of them fellas are scared, alone, humiliated, weak. They don't have the support you do. They go in looking like scared rabbits, and they come out mean as hell with a chip the size of Texas on their shoulders. Not all of them, but enough of them are like that. They got it in their heads all they have to do is kick someone's bum, and their problems are over. They lash out without thinking, and sometimes they end up in more trouble than they had going in. Basically, you're saying I need to learn to pick my fights, Max said. I get that it's a bit more than that, but you're on the right track, Eli said. A dresser and I can help you hone those skills so you're not a loose cannon out there tearing up everything in sight. Let them build you up physically, teach you what you need to know, but you need to remember one very important thing, Max asked. No matter how big and bad you think you are, there's always someone bigger and better than you, Eli said. You're not bulletproof like me, after all. I'm already dead. I can't be killed twice, Max said quietly. Eli chuckled and slapped Max on the shoulder. Don't worry, you'll do fine, he said. They finished their beer and cigarette and noticed it was time to get in line for the security check. They had no luggage, which surprised the security agent, and went through the detector without a hitch. Soon, they were in line to board the aircraft. They found their assigned seats and sat down. Max was placed in a seat next to one of the windows. Eli sat in a middle seat and looked a bit nervous. First time flying? Max asked. First time on one of these flying machines, he said. Max thought that a strange phrase. Normally, I'm on horseback, Max asked. Eli nodded his head. Yeah, he said. I'll tell you about it someday. I can't wait to hear about that, Max said. Trust me, these things are safer than just about any other means of transportation. Besides, even if we do crash, you don't have to worry, right? Technically, no, but that don't mean I like the idea of falling from hundreds of feet in the air, Eli said. Try thousands of feet, Max said. These things get pretty high. That makes me feel better, Eli said. Max smiled at that. Soon, the flight attendants were walking around, making sure everyone was belted in. Eli had some difficulty figuring it out, and Max helped him. After one of the flight attendants gave her safety spiel, she sat down, and the aircraft began its journey to the runway. They sat there for a minute or two, and suddenly, the aircraft began its takeoff. As it lifted off the runway, Max heard a quiet "oh" from Eli's seat and smiled to himself. As the aircraft reached its cruising altitude, Max looked and saw that Eli had relaxed a bit and was looking out the window. "You okay?" he asked the older man. "Yeah, this ain't so bad," Eli said. "I told you," Max responded. "If you don't mind, I'm going to get a bit of sleep, okay?" Eli said, looking out the window. A bit more than 3 hours later, the plane landed in Spokane, Washington, and they followed everyone else off the plane. Eli stayed with Max outside the terminal, and the two enjoyed one last cigarette as they waited for the bus that would take Max to Camp Rollins. Finally, the bus arrived, and a stocky man in a khaki uniform stepped out of the vehicle. "You heading for Camp Rollins?" he asked as he approached Max and Eli. "Yes, I am," Max said. The man nodded his head. "Go ahead and finish your smoke, then get on board," the man said. "Okay," Max said. They finished their cigarettes and shook hands after crushing out the butts. "You take care now," Eli said. "Remember what we told you, and you'll do just fine. I'll be back to get you when you're finished." "Thanks for everything, Eli," Max said. Eli nodded his head, tipped his hat, then turned and walked back into the terminal. Max saw a few others get on the bus, so he joined them. "Oh my God," the man in uniform yelled as he gazed at the small group of men standing on yellow footprints painted on the parking lot asphalt. "How in the hell do they expect me to make men when they won't even send me human beings to start with? This is the sorriest collection of illiterate, cum bub, I have ever seen in my entire life. Christ on a bicycle." He spoke to another man in uniform. "Get the sorry-ass bunch of maggots out of my sight and get them processed before I start cussing." "Yes, sir," another man wearing sergeant stripes said. As the sergeant turned to the group of about 15 men, Max wondered what the hell he had gotten himself into. These guys seemed far more severe than the military training instructors he had at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. "Turn to the right," the sergeant barked. They all faced to their right except for one skinny kid who turned to his left. The sergeant was instantly all over him like white on rice. "What are you, an idiot? Do you not even know the difference between right and left?" the sergeant screamed in the kid's face as he bounced the wide brim of his campaign hat off the kid's face. "This is your right," the sergeant screamed, stopping on the kid's right foot, "and this is your left," he added, stopping on the kid's left foot. "Now turn to your right," the sergeant ordered. The kid faced to the right, looking embarrassed. "Forward, move," the sergeant barked. Everyone started walking forward, following the sergeant's direction. When they reached what he realized was the processing center, the sergeant issued another order. "Hippity-hop, mob stop." Everyone stopped except for one guy who took an extra step. "God damn it. I said stop when I say stop, you stop, understand me, maggot," the sergeant screamed in his face. Before the man could respond, the sergeant walked away and opened the door to the building. He ordered the group inside and watched as they received their buzz haircuts, then took them to the clothing and equipment issue area. There, the students, as they were called, gave up all their personal items, clothing, wallets, jewelry, everything was tagged, inventoried, and placed in a locked container. They were even required to remove the batteries from their phones and give those up as well. They were then issued 2 sets of olive green overalls, several pairs of white t-shirts and boxer shorts, socks, tennis shoes, boots, caps, and a bag filled with toiletries. The sergeant gave them just a few seconds to shower, shave, and don their new uniforms. Once finished, he instructed them to form up outside where he explained the rules, which were simple. They were not to speak unless spoken to, they would run wherever they went, and were to follow whatever instructions they were given without question. He double-timed them to another small building, which they learned was their barracks, their home for the next 3 months. They were set loose and told to find their designated racks, the term that was used for their beds, and stow their gear in footlockers located at the foot of the small twin-sized beds. That night, Max slept soundly, dreaming of a particular blonde goddess. Shannon was clearly angry as she looked at her phone. Jake saw the anger in her face and approached her. "What's wrong?" he asked. "He's gone," she said. "I can't find him anywhere. I called the hospital and they told me he had been discharged and had already left. I know I put a tracker on his phone, but it doesn't seem to be working." "Maybe he turned it off or blocked you," Jake said. "The GPS should still be able to track his phone," she said. "Where is he?" "Don't worry, we'll find him," Jake said. "You'd better," she said, her face red. "There's $10 million on the line, and I can't afford to lose him." "Not now." Max had a difficult time during the first month of camp, but he was prepared for it. They ran everywhere, including up and down steep hills, through obstacle courses that included rope climbs into tall trees, and to the gym, where they worked out with weights until their arms were so weak that they could hardly move. The exercises that were given to them were ones that he found to be quite confusing at the time. These workouts began at 5 o'clock in the morning each and every day. As late as 6:30 p.m. When they returned from dinner, they were given permission to smoke one cigarette in a formation outside of their barracks. This was the time they were returned. Max couldn't help but notice that the half-pack that Eli had given him never appeared to be empty. They were never empty. Even though he was curious about it, he did not dwell on it. As far as Eli and a dresser were concerned, he was no longer surprised by anything. The students were only given a break on Sundays, all other days of the week. Those who desired to attend church were given jobs around the camp, such as mowing the grass or doing the laundry. Those who did not wish to attend church were given jobs. It was also the day that they were permitted to take part in letter writing. A few of them wrote letters to their wives, while others wrote letters to their children. A dresser would receive letters from Max in which he would express his feelings of longing for her and bring her up to speed on his progress. Due to the fact that he was certain that she was already aware of what was going on with him, he found it to be somewhat absurd. Even so, it was a satisfying experience to put pen to paper and communicate his thoughts to her. The letters that he received from her were something that he treasured, and he responded to them. Reading her meticulously crafted calligraphy, which appeared to be an art form in its own right, was something he enjoyed doing. Even by smelling the paper that she used, he was able to identify her scent. In addition to keeping him informed about her progress with Mario's books, she also kept him informed about what was going on with Jake and Shannon. As was the case with the other students, a private investigator monitored Shannon's activities and submitted weekly updates that included photographs alongside the information. According to what he gathered, she was a very busy girl, and not just because she was with Jake. But in contrast to the private investigator, a dresser was able to record the thoughts and plans that Shannon and Jake had. She was able to record the two of them in locations that the private investigator was unable to. Due to the fact that he was unable to watch any videos, a dresser made sure to keep those videos on file for him in case he ever desired to view them at a later time. The realization that he might be required to do so at some point in the future made him really not want to do it. With the passage of time, he came to the realization that Eli was correct about her. It was true that she was immortal, she was a goddess who possessed abilities and knowledge that he was just beginning to comprehend. On the other hand, she was a woman in every legitimate sense of the word. The more he read her letters and the more time he spent with her in his dreams, the more he found himself falling madly in love with her. He was gradually falling in love with her. The first month of camp came to an end in a timely manner, and Max discovered that he had shed the excess fat that had accumulated around his abdominal region. In addition, he discovered that the tone of his muscles had significantly improved, and despite the fact that he was exhausted, he appeared to have more energy than he had previously. At the beginning of the second month of camp, the students shared their heartbreaking stories of misfortune. It dawned on him as he listened to them talk that his situation was not nearly as dire as that of some of the other people. The night that he was ambushed, drugged, tied to a chair, cuckolded, and beaten was the subject of his story when it was his turn to make his presentation. Neither a dresser nor Eli were mentioned, rather, he simply stated that he received assistance from two close friends. During the time that he was telling his story, the counselor, Dr. Deborah White, listened attentively before taking notes. "Your case doesn't seem quite as bad as the others, Max," she said as he finished his sentence. "I can't help but wonder why you're here." "My friend said it would do me good," Max said in response. The question that she posed was, "Do you feel like it's helping so far?" "I do," he responded. To his laughter, he continued, "To begin, I've eliminated that spare tire that was around my stomach, and I'm experiencing a greater sense of self-assurance than I have in a considerable amount of time." She nodded her head in agreement. "Okay, Max," she said with confidence, "we'll talk more in private later." The subsequent step was to continue with the physical training, and the curriculum was expanded to include psychological counseling. He found some of it to be helpful, but he found a significant portion of it to be psychobabble. In his dreams, a dresser validated that information to him on multiple occasions. While this was going on, Shannon and Jake were completely absorbed in their efforts to pinpoint Max's particular location. When Shannon considered the fact that she had never been separated from her husband for more than a few days at a time, her level of concern increased even further. The fact that she had never received any communication from him, no phone calls, no emails, no texts, wonderful to her. Despite this, all of their bills were being paid, and she was receiving a weekly stipend, which she used to purchase food and other necessities for herself. As time went on, she started to wonder if Jake and Mario had possibly taken him out. She attempted to bring up the topic with Jake on multiple occasions, but he refused to listen to her. When it came to the latest information regarding Mario's books, all they received were emails from unknown senders stating that the books were being processed. Error messages stating that the address they attempted to contact did not exist were all that they received when they attempted to respond to these messages. What they were unaware of was the fact that sufficient information had already been transmitted to specific agencies, which were getting ready to make a number of significant arrests. After what seemed like an eternity, Max reached the third month of his training and discovered that he was enjoying the close combat and self-defense training that he was receiving. Without a doubt, the regular sessions of psychological counseling and physical training continued. In addition, they offered him free legal assistance. However, he declined the offer because he was already working with an attorney on his individual case. After that, the Burn the Witch ceremony, also known as the BTB ceremony, took place, which terminated their training. Following the meal, the instructors gathered the students outside around a pole that was surrounded by a pile of wood. Alongside it, a figure made of straw was lying on the ground. Their senior instructor issued the following command: "When I give the command, take one photo of your spouse and pin it to the figure." They were instructed to do so. They each took a picture of their partner and pinned it to the figure, and then they all yelled out, "Ready, move!" Max was only in possession of a photograph that he had obtained from the private investigator. The photograph depicted both Shannon and Jake. The photograph was attached to the figure by means of a pin that he inserted through Shannon's face. A command was issued by the instructor, not the figure. In order to ensure that the straw effigy was securely attached to the pole, they picked it up. It was the sergeant who issued the order, "Benich, front and center." Following Max's step in front of the sergeant, the latter handed him a torch that was lit. With both hands, he grabbed the torch and held it firmly in his grip. The command was given by the sergeant, "Burn the witch." When asked for his response, Max yelled out, "Sir, burn the witch." He then proceeded to the heap of wood that was located beneath the straw effigy and set it ablaze. The straw figure caught fire as the flames licked up and made contact with it. During the time that the straw figure was being consumed by flames, everyone chanted, "Burn, burn, burn." The photographs quickly became charred and curled up into a ball. The men yelled out under their breath, "Burn, burn, burn," while pumping their fists into the air. Additionally, they continued to chant while pumping their fists in the air. The figure began to burn, and the chants changed into howls and angry growls as it did so. Because of the way they howled, the men sounded more like wild animals than they did like human beings. In a short amount of time, the figure dropped from the pole and caught fire as it lay on the ground. As they celebrated the completion of their training, the sergeant distributed a beer to each individual from a chest that was located at his feet. Additionally, Max joined a group of other people and lit up a cigarette to accompany his beer. During that particular night, as he was lying in bed sleeping, a dresser joined him in his dreams, just as she had done every night since he returned. She said that was quite a ceremony, as she held him in her arms and said it. "How did it make you feel?" "Like a weight has been lifted off my back," he stated to reporters. "Well, I'm glad it helped," she said. "It was good. The last thing I want is to compete with memories of an ex-wife." "You have nothing to worry about, dear," he concluded by saying. "I must say, I like what they've been able to do with you," she said in response, physically as well as mentally. "I feel like a new man," he said in response, "and I owe it all to you." "No, my love," she said, "you had it in you all along. All I did was help you realize it. I couldn't have made it through this without you," he told her. "And truth be told, I can't imagine ever being without you. I told you, my dear sweet man, I love you and I'll always be here for you, always," she stated in response. He continued by saying, "I love you so much," a dresser, after he had looked at her from time to time. "And I love you too, Max," she went on to assert. "I'll always love you." He said, "Well, tomorrow is the big day," and he was right. "We graduate tomorrow." "I know," she responded. "Eli will be there to fly back with you. You should know that Shannon and Jake plan to be at your house tomorrow. They'll have some of Mario's guys there as well. They intend to track you down and kill you unless you provide the work they think you've been doing. The FBI has already brought in several high-powered figures for questioning, and Mario is convinced you somehow provided the evidence. There's going to be a lot of people arrested over the next few days. What do you suggest we do?" Max asked for clarification. She inquired, "Remember that this is your show as well. You need to handle this. We'll back you up, but you have to do the heavy lifting. I'm going to give you something that I think will help you. Lay back and close your eyes." The moment she took his head in her hands, Max did as she instructed, and he felt a warm sensation travel through his head. The sensation of a peculiar tingling in his brain was accompanied by flashes of light that appeared in his mind's eye. Upon her completion, he sat up in his chair. "What did you really do?" he inquired. "In her words, I gave you a little gift," she said. "I call it a command voice. You can use it to control any mortal." "How do I use it?" he asked for clarification. "Just focus on the command and give the order, like your instructors did here at the camp," she said in response. "Use it wisely, and don't forget what I told you earlier. No hand raised against you will prevail. Think of me as your armor, okay?" he said with conviction. He thought to himself, "Damn it," as his eyes flew open in a shocked manner. That was something that he experienced on a regular basis. He got up and went into the head, where he took a shower, shaved, and prepared himself for the day. He then followed the rest of the class into the head. The students went to breakfast, retrieved the items that they had turned in, and then gathered together for the graduation ceremony. They had just finished getting dressed in jeans and denim shirts that had been freshly laundered. These individuals were confronted by the camp commander as well as the senior instructor. "You men have come a long way since you arrived," the commander of the camp said to the young men. "You came here scared, uncertain about your future, defeated, and humiliated by the ones you love the most. Now, you've gotten your manhood back. You look like men with the confidence to take on the world. You have the tools and the wherewithal to take on and successfully complete whatever you set out to do. I wish the best for each one of you. Remember, we're here for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you need anything at all, even someone to talk to, we're here for you. Now go and take on the world." The senior sergeant of their organization stood in front of the class. The men yelled out, "Class attention!" Dismissed, as they gathered their belongings and made their way to the bus depot, pausing to shake the hand of the sergeant along the way. A good number of them gathered together prior to boarding the bus in order to share their contact information and make a commitment to maintain communication with one another. After they arrived at the airport, Max found Eli waiting for him in the terminal with the other passengers. While extending his hand, Eli flashed a grin. "You look good, Max," he said to me. "I see 3 months in the fresh air have done wonders for you." He thanked Eli for his assistance. "It's good to finally be able to go home." In addition to checking in, they boarded the aircraft. Eli shifted his attention to Max after they had taken their seats. "You should know that Shannon, Jake, and some of Mario's boys are at your house," he said in response. "Amos is with the private investigator keeping an eye on things. I'm told there are some sheriff's deputies with them." "Yeah, a dresser told me they'd be there," Max responded to her. The head of Eli was nodded. Eli inquired, "Are you going to be able to deal with this situation?" Max inhaled deeply and exhaled slowly after finishing his breath. As he put it, "I believe so. I just need to get some sleep." "Okay, partner, you'll just get some rest," Eli said in response. Before the plane reached its altitude, Max nodded his head and fell asleep shortly thereafter. After the plane touched down, Max awoke and saw Eli reading a magazine he had brought with him. "Did you have a good night's sleep?" Max smiled and said, "Yeah," while stretching his arms. "I'm ready to get this done." After Eli gave a slight nod of his head, the two of them, along with the other passengers, stood up and exited the aircraft. Due to the fact that they did not possess any luggage, they went outside and called a taxi. In spite of this, a young man on a skateboard came crashing down the sidewalk, knocking over a woman who was pushing a baby stroller. This occurred before they entered the building. "Hey, you!" Max summoned to you. When the young man on the skateboard came to a stop, he turned his attention to Maximum. It was the teenager who inquired, "Are you talking to me?" Max took a look at the rings that he had inserted into his upper lip and nose. "Yeah, you," Max said out loud. "Get over here and apologize to this woman, now," he instructed the staff. During the time that he was giving the order, he became aware of a slight vibration in his voice. He was fully anticipating that the child would give him a bunch of crap, but he did not. Instead of continuing to ride his skateboard, the young man got off of it, picked it up, and walked over to the woman he had knocked over. "I'm sorry," he said in a very embarrassed tone. "I wasn't looking where I was going." "Is everything okay with you?" she inquired. "Yes, I am," she responded. "Thank you." The head of Max was nodded. "Greetings, and thank you for your time. You have a nice day now." As she continued to walk, the woman smiled. Amazed, Max climbed into the taxi, and Eli followed closely behind. After providing the driver with his destination, Max turned his attention to Eli. The question that he posed was, "Did you see that?" The head of Eli was nodded. "I did," Eli stated. "Good job. Just don't let it go to your head." That made Max laugh out loud. Within a short period of time, they arrived at Max's residence, which was situated on a 5-acre wooded lot on the outskirts of the town. A pickup truck that Eli had seen before was discovered by them. He requested that the driver come to a stop for a brief moment. As soon as the driver came to a stop, Amos made his way to the taxi. "There are 4 fellas inside with Mrs. Burns and her lawyer friend," he stated to reporters. "Process server and sheriff's deputies are here with arrest warrants for all of them." Eli responded, "Okay." He gave the driver a signal to pull into Max's property, and the driver did so. After paying the driver with his credit card, Max exited the vehicle and began walking away. On the other side, Eli was able to escape. In addition to directing the others to follow closely behind him, he motioned for the taxi driver to leave. Following the departure of the cab from the premises, Max, Eli, Amos, the process server, and 2 deputies went to the front door. Meanwhile, a 3rd deputy went behind the house to enter from the back door to complete the investigation. Max walked in after opening the door for himself. As the 4 thugs turned around and started to draw their weapons, Max was able to prevent them from doing so. "Freeze," he gave the order. In an instant, the 4 men halted whatever it was that they were doing. Sit down and keep your hands in a position where we can see them, Max given the order. Everyone complied, which came as a complete surprise to the deputies. After turning his attention to the process server, Max gave a slight nod. Shannon was approached by the process server on foot. One of his questions was, "Are you Miss Shannon Burns?" The woman gave a slight nod. "Answer him, as Max instructed." Her response was, "Yes, my name is Shannon Burns." She took the envelope that was handed to her by the person who was serving the process. "You have been served," he said before taking a step back toward the audience. When Shannon opened the envelope, she discovered a set of divorce papers, but she did not appear surprised by the discovery. "Sign the papers," Max instructed a person to do. After shaking her head, Shannon took a pen from Jake and signed the documents before returning them to the server. He whispered, "I'll get this back to your attorney," to the other person. The head of Max was nodded. Max whispered, "Now, all of you are going to be arrested and taken to jail," and he continued his statement. "When you get there, you will all confess your crimes. All of them. You will sing like canaries and then throw yourselves on the mercy of the court. And you will accept whatever punishment you are given. Do you understand?" Jake bemoaned, "But Mario will have us killed," and he was right. "Please have mercy on us." His question was, "Mercy? You mean like you had on me? Screw you. You're lucky to be alive right now. That's as much mercy as I'll grant you." He turned to the members of the law enforcement. "Take them away," he whispered in a low voice. Everyone was taken into custody by the deputies, and their rights were read to them while Max, Eli, and Amos watched through the window. While she was being restrained, Shannon turned her gaze to Maximum. Her question was, "What exactly happened to you?" He said, "You happened to me, and I agreed. And for the record, Maxwell Burns no longer exists." Her question was, "What? Then who are you really?" The tone of his voice, which he used to say Max Parach, caused her to feel chills all the way down her spine. After removing them from the residence, the deputies loaded them into their vehicles and drove away. After the police cruisers had left the property, they watched them leave. Max received a slap on the shoulder from Eli. "I am proud of you, son," he said. When they turned around and went back inside, Max shut the door and was taken aback to see a dresser standing in the front room while they were inside. The expression on her face was one of contentment as she encircled Max with her arms. "Yes, I concur," she stated. "Although I am a bit surprised you let her live." Max stated, "I gave that a lot of thought beforehand." "I know," she responded. "Why did you spare her life?" According to Max, there are a few reasons. First, I didn't want her death on my conscience. Second, I figured her suffering is just beginning. Something tells me she won't last too long behind bars. A dresser gave her approval by nodding her head. "Eli, you were absolutely correct," she added. "He does have the heart for this." Then she continued, "There is only one thing that needs to be done." According to Max, Maria. Her response was yes, as she pulled out her tablet. She presented him with the tablet and said, "At this very moment, he is engaging in a meeting with his attorney in New York." They were talking about the federal case that was being brought against Mario, and he saw Mario sitting at his pool desk with a well-dressed man. The thought monitor was located at the bottom of the video, and he saw it. As the attorney continued to speak, Mario's thoughts turned to the fact that he was going to have Maxwell Burns drawn and quartered for what he had done. The question that a dresser posed was, "How would you like to crash his little party?" Max looked at her, his interest piqued by her presence. After that, he inquired, "And how would we manage that?" Taking his hand in hers, a dresser smiled and smiled again. "Follow me," she whispered in a low voice. She informed Eli and Amos that they would be back in a short while. She refocused her attention on Maximum. "I'll be with you, but they won't see me. Follow your heart and do what you think is right." The head of Max was nodded. She said, "Now, take one step with me," and I agreed. After following her instructions, he found himself on the pool deck of Mario's house. Before they left his living room, he turned his head to the right and looked in the direction of a dresser. He was able to notice her outline, but he was aware that they were unable to see her. In the midst of a conversation, he turned his attention back to Mario and his attorney. When he wanted to get their attention, he cleared his throat. Astonished, they looked at him in shock. Mario asked, "Who are you?" as he stood up from his seat. "Yes," the prosecutor responded. "Speak up, man. Who are you and how did you get here? Don't you recognize the accountant you wanted to do your books?" Max asked in response. Mr. Mario questioned, "What? What are you talking about?" "I'm the guy Jake and Shannon told you about." "Oh, so you're the accountant who double-crossed me?" Mario asked in response. "Do you know who you're dealing with? Do you realize I can have you taken out with a single call? The real question is, do you know who you're dealing with?" Max asked in response. Mr. Mario retreated a few paces. It was a new experience for him to have people challenge him. He deliberated over his choices before making his statement. "Everything is fine," Mario said. "You've got my attention. Now, tell me what I need to do to make things right with you. Do you know that even if the feds come after me, I'll never spend a minute behind bars? My lawyers will keep the courts tied up in knots for years. So, tell me what it is you want. Money? I've got lots of it. Women? I've got more than I can shake a stick at. You can have some of it, as much as you want. Just name your price." The anger that Max felt caused his face to turn red. He was aware, on some level, that Mario was correct, despite the fact that he was deserving of spending the rest of his life behind bars. He was aware that Mario's legal team would do everything in their power to prevent him from being released, and he would be free to continue to wreak havoc on more people's lives and to thrive off of the destruction he had left behind. In spite of the fact that this creature possessed no redeeming qualities whatsoever, Max was aware that he needed to be eliminated. "There's only one thing you can do that would satisfy me," Max stated in response. Mario stated, "Name it," with a great deal of excitement. A smile appeared on Max's face, but it was devoid of any warmth. "Anything," said Maximum Drop Dead, Max ordered. "Drop dead." Mario first smiled, but it quickly faded, and he brought his hand to his chest. Mario then smiled again. Although he struggled to take a breath, he was unable to do so. Before his eyes finally rolled up, he gave Max one final look before moving on. Because he had fallen to the concrete, his eyes had become cloudy with death. Max received a stunned look from the attorney. His question was, "Who are you?" "Max Bark," Max said to him. "And as far as you're concerned, I don't exist. I was never here. Understand?" "Yes, I do understand," the attorney stutteringly responded. "It was good," Max said. The attorney lowered himself to the concrete, his eyes closing in a deep slumber as he said, "Now, go to sleep. And when you wake up, you won't remember a thing." It was then that Max found himself standing in his front room, with a dresser standing next to him with a broad smile on her face. Max felt a warm hand in his. With a nervous tone, he inquired, "Did I do okay?" She encircled his neck with her arms and kissed him passionately amidst the embrace. "Yes," she responded as she broke the kiss away from him. "More than okay. My avenging angel. So, I take it our services are no longer required here tonight?" Eli asked in response. A dresser responded, "No, Eli, I have it under control, at the time. But remember your promise. You're a mortal man with all the desires that come with it. And I know you may be tempted from time to time, but I'll always be here in your heart, and I'll help see you through those temptations." "I can't believe all this is happening to me," he stated in response. "Your life will definitely be different from here on out, Max," she said in response. After a coma that lasted for 15 long days, Max was finally able to regain consciousness. As soon as he opened his eyes, the sterile environment of the hospital room began to come into focus around him. His thoughts were filled with a whirlwind of confusion as he attempted to piece together what had taken place. The edges of his consciousness were filled with fragments of memories, but nothing seemed to be solid or real. The realization dawned on him: everything that he had experienced while he was in a coma was nothing more than a dream. His subconscious mind had been responsible for the vivid images of his wife's infidelity, the searing pain of cheating, and the burning desire for revenge. All of these things had been developed by his subconscious mind. Max pushed himself upright in the hospital bed, making it clear that he was intent on confronting his wife and exacting his revenge. His resolve was burning brightly, despite the fact that weakness continued to course through his limbs. While he was aware that confronting his wife would require both physical and mental strength, he was determined to find the strength that would allow him to do so. With each passing day, Max remained steadfast in his commitment to his recovery with a single goal in mind. Every session of physical therapy turned into a battleground for him, with each exercise bringing him one step closer to regaining his strength. As a result of his determination to exact revenge, he exerted himself more than before. In order to recover, it took 20 more days. At this point, it is time to exact revenge. We're going to work on a follow-up story very soon, so please stay tuned for that. If you have any thoughts, please share them in the comments section below. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel.